Cover Up, Chapter 14, Turnover. The trip back to the hotel didn't take very long. At least, it didn't feel long to Stevie. They had decided that they really needed to track down Bobby and Tamara and let them know what was going on. They held off on further discussions until Dave dropped them off in front of the Canterbury. It occurred to Stevie as they climbed out the car and walked into the lobby that it was after 8 o'clock and they hadn't had any dinner. "I'm starving," Stevie said. "You want to walk over to St. Elmo's?" she said. "It's right next door." He shook his head. "We'll never get a table." "Yes, we will," she said. "Follow me." They walked back outside, turned right, and walked to the front door of St. Elmo. The entrance was packed with people, but Susan Carroll was undeterred. They got to the maitre d' station and were greeted by a tall man in a tuxedo. "Welcome back," he said to Susan Carroll, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. Susan Carroll turned to Stevie and said, "Mike D'Angelo, this is Steve Thomas. You may have seen Steve on CBS last night." Whether D'Angelo had seen Stevie or not seemed irrelevant. He gave him a warm handshake and a smile. "A lot of your colleagues in here," he said to both of them. "Steve, I just sat Mr. McManus's party a few minutes ago. Your crowd is downstairs, Susan Carroll. Are you joining one of them, or would you like your own table?" "If it's okay, we'd like our own table," Susan Carroll said. "Is there any place that's a little bit quiet?" He nodded. "Got just the spot for you. Follow me." Mike D'Angelo delivered them to a booth in the back corner of the room furthest from the door from the restaurant. "Not exactly quiet," he said, "but as close as I can get you to it." "It's perfect," Susan Carroll said. "Thank you so much, Mike." "Anytime," he said. "You know that." He walked away. "So what's the deal with that?" Stevie said. "When did you charm him?" She shook her head. "Not me," she said. "My dad. Remember I told you about the Bible study group he formed to help people addicted to sports? Mike was addicted to fantasy football, almost ruined his marriage. He heard about what my dad was doing, found some people to form a group here, and he's completely out of all fantasy sports. My dad called him and let him know I'd be in town. I met him when I came in for dinner on Monday, and he told me I could have a table anytime I wanted all week." "Who'd you have dinner with on Monday night?" he asked. She paused for a moment. "Jamie," she said. "We just met. The network wanted us to spend some time together." "Uh-huh." "I told you." I know, he said. The waiter came and they ordered right away since it was late and they were hungry. Stevie got a laugh when he asked Susan Carroll if she wanted to see a wine list. "Okay," she said. "Let's say we get these test results tomorrow. How are we going to do this?" "Well, I came here for the Herald, so I owe them first crack over CBS, but what about you? Will USTV be furious?" "First, I don't care," she said. "Second, I'm not sure this is a story that has anyone who has to negotiate TV rights with the NFL wants to touch." Stevie hadn't thought about that. She was probably right. He couldn't imagine CBS being thrilled about a story that might blow up the Super Bowl, especially if the linemen were forced to sit out of the game. In fact, there was a good chance they wouldn't be thrilled to see his name on any story if and when it broke. Oh well. Everyone had been nice to him at CBS, but he was still a writer, first and foremost. "What do you think the chances are that Snow will actually come through?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't think he has much choice. He would be completely humiliated if I went on air and repeated what happened the other night." "Yes, but we both know you can't really do that, and it all depends on whether he believes if you can. And will." Snow struck him as the kind of guy who would protect himself before he worried about protecting anyone else. Giving them the information was his only way out, if he fell for their bluff. Their food arrived. Stevie was wolfing down a massive porterhouse steak when Susan Carroll's cell phone rang. When he heard Susan Carroll's cell phone ring, he knew it was hers because it played the Duke fight song when it rang. "Sorry," she said, putting her silverware down and reaching into her pocket. She rolled her eyes when she saw the number on the screen. "I shouldn't answer this," she said, shaking her head. "Hi, Tal. What is it?" She listened for a moment. "I'm at St. Elmo's. Why?" More listening. "Right now?" And then, "I'm sitting upstairs with Stevie in the back room in the corner booth." She listened for a moment longer, then said, "Okay, fine," and closed the phone. "What was that?" Stevie asked. He's downstairs, like Mike told us, with all the other guys from her crew. He said he has to talk to me right away. Oh, God, Stevie said. He's probably going to give you a hard time for being with me. He didn't say anything when I said I was with you. He sounded strange, almost, I don't know, scared. Stevie was about to ask her what she meant when he saw Tal Vincent approaching the table. Without so much as a hello, he slid into the booth next to Susan Carroll. Nice to see you too, Tal, Susan Carroll said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Don't start, he said. What the hell do you think you two are up to? Have you lost what's left in your minds? Trying to blackmail a team doctor? Stevie and Susan Carroll looked at each other. Clearly, Snow had made a move they hadn't expected. Susan Carroll gave Stevie a stay calm look. What are you talking about, Tal? She said. You know what I'm talking about. Tom Snow called Mike Shoup about 20 minutes ago. He said you two were trying to blackmail him with a wild story about him coming on to you the other night. But he did come on to me. Be quiet. He said that he was trying to be nice to you and you asked him a bunch of questions about drug testing. He said he was explaining to you what happens when someone tests positive, and somehow you got the idea that he was telling you that someone on the team had actually tested positive? What? Susan Carroll screamed. Now Stevie was shooting her calm down looks. The one thing he knew they didn't want to do was tip their hand on the story to Vincent. Tal, he's a complete liar, Susan Carroll said. That isn't close to what happened. What happened was, he tried to pick her up, Stevie said. He's a dirtbag. We just told him that if he didn't leave her alone, we'd go public. He wouldn't stop calling her. We had to do something. Vincent glared. Then why is he claiming blackmail? I guess we scared him too much? When did this become we? What have you got to do with this anyway? Stevie's my friend, Susan Carroll said. I went to him for help because the guy wouldn't stop calling me. He said he didn't know I was 14. Did you tell him you were going to go on air and accuse him of coming on to you? She cast her eyes downward for a moment as if embarrassed. Clearly, she had picked up the idea that letting Vincent in on the whole truth was not a good idea. I guess I did. I couldn't think of anything else to do to get him to go away. Vincent softened a bit. What's he talking about with all this drug testing stuff? I don't know, Susan Carroll said. He was bragging that half the team wouldn't be able to play without his painkillers. Maybe that's his way of distracting you from the fact that he's a lech. Vincent leaned back into the booth's seat cushion. Okay, I'll take you at your word on that. Either way, just stay away from the guy. And whatever he said to you, there's no way it's coming up on air. You got that? Stevie could see that Susan Carroll was thinking the same thing he was thinking. If the threat of exposing Snow on air was gone, they weren't going to be getting any documents the next day. He'd outmaneuvered them. Susan Carroll took one last stab. What if he keeps calling me? She said. You come and tell me, and I'll deal with him, Vincent said, which is what you should have done in the first place. He slid out of the booth. You know something, Susan Carroll? You've been a pain in the butt all week. I really don't need this teen drama. Trust me when I tell you, the people back in the office will hear about all of this. Trust me when I tell you, I don't care, Susan Carroll said. Vincent stared at her for a second, started to say something, then turned and walked off. Now what? Susan Carroll leaned back and sighed. What choice do we have? She said. Drop back 10 and punt. By the end of dinner, they had an alternative to punting. As planned, they would bring Kelleher and Mearns into the picture. Only now they were hoping the Washington Herald and Washington Post might both run a story about Susan Carroll and her encounter with Snow. He'd deny it, but she was a credible source, and the newspapers weren't nearly as likely to scare off the story because of a phone call. They knew it was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. They finished dinner, thanked Mike D'Angelo, and walked back outside, because it was almost impossible to hear anyone on a cell phone from inside. Susan Carroll got through to Kelleher and told him that she and Stevie needed to talk to them right away. An hour? Stevie heard her say with a sigh. Okay, then. In the Marriott lobby at 11 o'clock. She was starting to hang up when he saw her nod in response to something Kelleher had said. As a matter of fact, we have. Then she hung up. As a matter of fact, we have what? Gotten ourselves in trouble again, she said. Come on, we can sit in the Canterbury lobby and have a hot chocolate while we kill time. They're at a party and can't get back to the hotel until 11 o'clock. If the circumstances were different, Stevie might have enjoyed sitting in front of a fire, sipping hot chocolate with Susan Carroll sitting next to him, her legs curled up underneath her. The lobby was quiet, but they were both jumpy, looking at their watches every 5 minutes, except when Stevie started to look every 2 minutes. Finally, at 10:45, Susan Carroll said, "Come on, let's get a cab. It's too cold to walk." "What about your car?" Stevie said. "I told Dave to take the rest of the night off." The doorman got them a cab. Downtown was still packed, and they probably could have walked to the Marriott as quickly as they got there in the cab, but they would have been icicles by the time they arrived. They walked into the lobby at precisely 11 o'clock and found it jammed, just as it had been all week. Kelleher and Mearns were standing right near the door, both looking concerned. "I hope you were joking about being in trouble again," Kelleher said. "But something tells me you weren't." "Nope," Susan Carroll said. "We need a quiet place to talk." "Follow me," Kelleher said. He led them up the escalator to the second floor. They walked past the Radio Row, quiet now, except for a couple of West Coast stations that were still on the air, around the corner, and past a room marked Media Hospitality, which was packed. They walked all the way down the hall until Kelleher opened the door to one of the many conference rooms. "They never lock these rooms," he said. He felt around on the wall until he found a light switch. The room was set up for some kind of meeting the next morning, but was completely empty at the moment. They pulled 4 chairs into a circle and sat down. "Okay," Bobby said. "What have you two gotten into this time?" Susan Carroll walked them through the story, with Stevie throwing details along the way. Every so often, Kelleher and Mearns looked at each other and shook their heads in disbelief. Neither one of them interrupted until Susan Carroll had finished her description of Vincent interrupting their dinner after Snow's frantic phone call to Mike Shoup. "You guys are amazing," Bobby said. "You remind me of that Peanuts character, Pigpen, who had dirt following him wherever he went. You guys have stories, messy stories no one would believe, following you around." Tamara stood up. "Too true," she said. "But what are we going to do? We need a cleanup story." Kelleher nodded. "It's your story," he said, looking at Stevie and Susan Carroll. "What do you think we ought to do?" Susan Carroll looked at Stevie. "Go ahead," he said. "This all started because you wore high heels." "Nice," she said. Then she turned to Kelleher and said, Kelleher and Mearns, "Bobby, I think you should call Dr. Snow," she said. "For one thing, that'll let him know the circle is widened, and then there are adults involved now. Tell him the Herald and Post are planning to do stories on Saturday in which I will describe our conversation at the party on Tuesday night in detail. But if he'd like to go on record, or if he can produce documents we asked for, we'd prefer to run with the real story and not make him the focus." Mearns looked at Susan Carroll. "I want you to think seriously about this for a moment," she said. "We believe you, of course. But if we accuse this guy of coming on to you, the team, and maybe even the league, are going to come after you. They're going to call you a liar. They're going to try to say you encouraged him in some way, that you lied about your age. Whatever it takes to undercut you and your story. They will call you names. That will make your parents very unhappy, no matter how untrue they are." "And there will be people who believe them," Kelleher said. Susan Carroll looked a bit stunned. "We aren't trying to talk you out of anything," Mearns said, "but you need to understand what the possible consequences of going forward are. You already found out tonight how quickly someone working for an NFL team can get to a big-time TV executive. They'll come after you with every bit of power they have. And they've got plenty." "What if we can get Brennan to go on the record?" Stevie asked. "You've already explained why it would be suicide for him to go on the record." "But if they try to smear Susan Carroll and he knows they're lying, I'll bet he'd come to her defense." "Are you willing to bet her reputation and maybe her future as a reporter on it?" Stevie took a deep breath. "Obviously, that's not my decision to make," he said. They all looked at Susan Carroll. It was now her turn to take a deep breath. "How about this?" she said finally. "Bobby, you make the call first thing in the morning, see what Dr. Snow says, and then we can decide what to do next." Kelleher stood up. "I think that sounds like a plan," he said. "Let's all get some sleep. Tomorrow could be a long day." He smiled. "Friday is usually the easy day at the Super Bowl. No access to the players or even the dome. Just a press conference here in the Marriott with the 2 coaches and then one with the commissioner." "Yeah," Mearns said. "They call it his State of the Game address." Too bad he's got no idea what the state of his game is right now.